Video game development sure is a tough process, with tons of artists, developers, and publishers all hustling together in the hope of making great art. Or at the very least, moving a bunch of units. And the complexity of that process is such that even otherwise brilliant games can allow baffling and bizarre design choices to slip through the cracks. Whether a stern mandate from high-up executives or simply an eccentric creative call that didn't pay off, these video game design choices all fell a little short of the mark. From needlessly recycling outdated mechanics to shamelessly shoving cynical gimmicks into the mix, or maybe just not letting players pause a damn cutscene, these games all made oddball design choices that haven't aged well. I'm Jess from WhatCulture, and here are 10 painfully dumb design choices in video games. Number 10. The opening announcements. Splatoon 2. Splatoon 2 is one of the Nintendo Switch's finest multiplayer offerings, but why on earth did they make the woefully counterintuitive decision to force players to sit through an agonizingly overlong opening scene? The boot sequence features the game's hosts, Pearl and Marina, as they walk you through the maps you're about to encounter, which is fine the first time and the second time, then it gets a lot less fine. Players are forced to spam the A button to get past this pointless spiel as fast as possible, and given that the Switch's own design philosophy is concerned with fast boot times and speedy play, this verbose brick wall couldn't feel more at odds with it. There are inevitably some sneaky workarounds, like disconnecting your Switch from the internet in order to skip the sequence, or simply leaving the Switch in sleep mode with the game booted, though the latter is obviously negated if you decided to swap to any other game, or if Splatoon 2 required an update. Basically, it's a hilariously backwards design choice that benefits no one and simply ensures it takes longer to get into a game that thrives on its snappy, bite-sized appeal. The fact that Nintendo hasn't patched the ability to just press one button and skip this in this much time is honestly mind-boggling. Number 9. Stand still to aim. Resident Evil 4. The Resident Evil franchise's infamous tank controls have proven massively divisive among players, though in fairness, it's a choice that absolutely made sense for the first 3 games. These early entries into the series heavily restricted the player's movements and forced them to fight off zombies within a constricted series of camera angles, while requiring them to stop moving in order to aim and fire their weapons. But when Resident Evil 4 revolutionized the franchise by introducing over-the-shoulder gunplay, it made sense that Capcom probably should have also adjusted the controls, specifically lessening the aiming restrictions. Instead, players found themselves still being forced to stand still if they wanted to aim. While some fans might argue that this heightened the game's tension, considering its countless innovations otherwise, it felt lazily old school in a game otherwise keen to move the series on. Sadly, Resi 5 also retained the stand-to-aim mechanic, and it wasn't until Resident Evil Revelations and the otherwise terrible Resident Evil 6 that players were actually able to strafe while aiming. Standing still to aim absolutely had its place within the early Resident Evil titles, but once aiming moved to over the shoulder, it feels like it should have gone the way of the dodo, but at least things have definitely improved with the series since then. Number 8. Press down to jump. Conan the Mysteries of Time. Don't feel bad if you've never played the 1991 NES disaster piece, Conan the Mysteries of Time, because it's quite probably one of the worst video games ever made. And its most egregiously irritating feature? The baffling choice to assign the 45-degree jump maneuver to the freaking down button on the D-pad, like a maniac. This is obviously antithetical to the idea that in order to jump, you think you'd be pressing the up button, or better yet, nothing on the D-pad at all, and that the down button would be used for something like ducking. But what truly makes this table-flippingly annoying is the fact that down plus A is also used to pick up items. And so in order to avoid accidentally jumping to your own death while collecting an object, you need to press A slightly before down to successfully grab the item. Seriously, what the hell? Number 7. Random tripping. Super Smash Bros. Brawl. The Super Smash Bros. Franchise is much loved for its ludicrously addictive and deceptively deep gameplay, but 2008's long-awaited Super Smash Bros. Brawl invoked the ire of its passionate fanbase by adding an extremely unpopular mechanic to the mix: random tripping. That's right, Brawl introduced the possibility that any player, no matter how skilled, might randomly trip during a match. And why might they randomly trip? Our old friend RNG. Though this was clearly an attempt to lessen the skill gap between players by introducing random shenanigans, pro players especially weren't amused, frustrated that tripping could potentially derail a crucial attack or prevent a last-minute escape. Furthermore, in another willfully obtuse move by Nintendo, there was no way to turn off random tripping, at least without using a mod. This ain't Mario Kart. Random shouldn't be the order of the day, and given how seriously so many players take the series, it felt wildly misguided to impose mandatory chance elements on everyone. Mercifully, Nintendo listened to the vocal fan outcry and ditched tripping from all subsequent Smash releases. Number 6. Overheating javelins. Anthem. In fairness, BioWare's divisive multiplayer RPG released with a heap of bizarre design issues, though by far the most pervasive and game-breaking was the decision to limit the player's ability to fly around in their Iron Man-like javelin suits. In an effort to keep co-op players together, javelins would overheat, so you'd get to a point where you'd maxed out your meter and you could no longer fly or hover around and you had to wait for it to charge up again. Flying is by far the most entertaining activity Anthem has to offer, so placing infuriating and ungenerous limitations on it is an unquestionably dopey design choice, and surely among the many reasons for the game's player base quickly dying off. Number 5. Weapon durability. The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild is one of the greatest games of our generation, and honestly, probably all time. And that is all in spite of one very divisive mechanic. While weapon durability isn't inherently a bad idea, it's employed horribly throughout Breath of the Wild, given the tendency for weapons to break after an indecently short time, requiring players to swap to a new one far too frequently. Now, players who do even a cursory amount of exploration should find themselves stocked with plentiful weaponry, but the lack of clear information about your weapon's durability pre-break is frustrating, unaided by the game's relatively high degree of challenge. It's clear that Nintendo were hoping players would come up with more creative solutions for their weapon breaking rather than just whipping out another one mid-combat, but as it happened, it tended to just be a tedious addition. Number 4. The Auction House. Diablo 3. Remember Diablo 3's infamous auction house? Initially, it was a way to clamp down on third-party selling of Diablo 3 items, all within a safer space that could be controlled by the developer and publisher. There were 2 marketplaces, one operating with in-game gold and the other with real-world money, but it quickly became clear that being able to buy that sweet loot of the auction house massively devalued the core Diablo experience. Diablo is, at its core, all about battling for hours in order to hoover up rare loot, and so allowing players to buy it with a few clicks in Diablo 3 made the series' core gameplay loop feel relatively hollow, if not entirely meaningless. Players using real money could effectively conduct their game from the auction house without having to do much fighting, and there was a clear incentive to study the meta of the auction house more than the actual systems of the core gameplay. Thankfully, Blizzard removed both versions of the auction house within 2 years of the game launching, but for a lot of fans, the damage was done. Number 3. Cutscenes that can't be paused. The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. Is there anything more archaic in a contemporary game than being unable to pause a cutscene? It's a much complained about issue that developers had seemingly solved years and years ago, and yet, for shame, 2015's The Witcher 3 doesn't offer players an option to pause cutscenes. Now, there are workarounds to this, as PC players can Alt-Tab and hope for the best, or install a mod which allows the ability to pause, while console players can open their system dashboard for a soft pause. But the lack of an actual dedicated cutscene pause feature within the game is absolutely shameful. Given how long some of these scenes can go for and how well accustomed many people have grown to, not totally abandoning their real life for a video game, it seems weird that a game as blockbustery as this one wouldn't have addressed that issue. Number 2. The microphone mini-games, Mario Party. Mario Party 6 introduced a most bizarre and thankfully short-lived new mechanic to the series, with players able to plug a microphone peripheral into the GameCube in order to play a number of mic-specific mini-games requiring them to use their voice and, blow on the mic. Unfortunately, the mic was more of a gimmick than an actual useful accoutrement to the experience. No matter how hard Nintendo tried, there just isn't much that's fun about speaking the number of a dice roll aloud and hoping that it might influence the roll. The mic returned for Mario Party 7 and also Mario Party DS, the latter of which used the DS's inbuilt mic, but the results were similarly listless, after which Nintendo thankfully ditched the idea entirely. Never again, please. Number 1. Universal Ammo. Deus Ex: Invisible War. Deus Ex: Invisible War is a game so baffling that even many hardcore fans of the series haven't bothered with it. It's a title jam-packed with eyebrow-raising choices not befitting its iconic predecessor. Perhaps most of all, the decision to give players universal ammunition. This meant that the player just had a single pool of ammo to draw from, and every single weapon in their possession could utilize this pool. In theory, this was to make combat and reloading simpler for casual players, but it had the unintended side effect of making everything a lot more frustrating. Using a heavy weapon even just a few times typically depleted a large amount of ammo for smaller weapons, and though the intentions behind this concept may have been earnest, all it ultimately did was discourage players from experimenting with different weapons. Awful. That's the end of our list, but do let me know down in that comment section if you can think of any other examples of painfully dumb design decisions in video games. As always, I've been Jess from WhatCulture. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. If you like, you can come say hello to me on my Twitter account where I'm @JessMcDonald, but make sure you stay tuned to us here for plenty more great gaming lists.